I got my PhD in an area called psychoneuroimmunology, which is a very fancy term that nobody understands. And it's really just the study of how our minds and our bodies, our emotions, and our consciousness can connect. And a lot of the work that we do is not just looking at the interconnection in here, but the interconnection between us. Here is the biological reality. We are biologically wired to feel each other and heal each other, but whether we do or we don't has everything to do with our consciousness. It has everything to do with our perception.
Once our brain has made sense of someone and put them into whatever box or category our brain wants to put them in, it's almost like we put on contact lenses. And the way we see that human is no longer specific to them, it's about us. And the way that I interact with them, the words I use, my tone, my body language, the way I think about them, the way I talk about them to other people, all of that is impacted by my story. We have a responsibility related to bias. And our job, our responsibility is, if we want to create better relationships, better communities, better workplaces, right? Which I sort of assume you all want that or you wouldn't be here. We have to control for bias. We cannot eradicate bias, right? I've done way too much research. I've read all the books. I've done all the things. We can't get rid of bias. It happens for too many reasons in our brain, but we can control it.
Empathy is to feel in union with another person. Is making, the short definition of empathy is a decision. It's a decision that you make to accompany somebody in experiencing, feeling, or thinking something, even when that is not what you feel, think, or experience. This stuff is important. Emotional intelligence, we need to work on understanding our emotion, understanding how to regulate them. We need to find ways to motivate ourselves to be better, to do better, right? And we need to have the empathy to understand what other people may be thinking, feeling, and experiencing. And we have to make the decision to join them using the dusting model. We're going to join them in feeling, experiencing, and thinking what they're experiencing, feeling, and thinking, so that we can have better communities, we can have better homes, we can feel better with ourselves.
I suggest that some of the nasty biases that we hate, the gender bias, the age bias, the race bias, they're all caught up in these types of biases. And so the other ones we try to fight against, and the other ones we come to places like this and we talk about, but we don't talk about these biases. And so affinity bias is the cousin to racial bias. Because I have affinity bias, people that don't look like me, act like me, I end up hiring everybody that's just like me. And I'm not intentionally being racist. I'm not intentionally not hiring people of a certain gender, but because we don't relate and because I don't have an affinity towards them, it is a byproduct of me hiring people that are just alike. And the same can be true of conformity bias, and the same can be true of the halo and the horn effect, because the truth is we get so caught up in people who are like us and who do things like us, we have a bias towards them, and the workplace is limited, and those barriers are being created simply because we haven't addressed these biases.
Well, we're trying to change the narrative of people with criminal background. Our organization is trying to do everything we can to make sure that people who are getting out of prison will get out and stay out, and we give them the proper resources to stay out.
Health disparities are defined as differences in health due to discrimination or exclusion. So in other words, our overt and unconscious biases as a collective society drive health disparities. All in all, increasing representation of historically marginalized groups, teaching people how to become more culturally competent, and confronting our own biases can move the needle of healthcare towards justice.
People with a mental illness are more likely to be the victim of a crime than they are to commit a crime. People with mental illness see that disability and anxiety disorders are the leading cause of disability worldwide. You would think that we would be looking to solve that more aggressively than we are. Suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in the U.S. But when we look deeper into that number and we see the age 15 to 24-year-olds, it is the second leading cause of death in America. Let's see the people and not the disease. These are people that are suffering in silence many times.
So when we talk about bias in an educational setting, we're talking about when one group or an individual student is treated differently. Right, part of On Track's work is creating climate and culture, creating belonging and inclusion. That outweighs any intervention. In a world that's full of bias, we are losing our students every day in schools, with every moment, with every narrative, with every stereotype. And if we don't address it, then we are doing so much damage to our community.
Do you know the worst thing about being homeless? It's not being cold or wet or hungry. The worst thing about being homeless is being looked right through. I might argue that our bias against homeless people is not quite as unconscious as some of our other biases. I think it's very conscious, and it stems from fear. You might think that bias against homeless people is something of a touchy-feely problem, but it's not. It's a matter of life and death. We all want to be noticed, included, helpful. We all want to belong to a community.
76%. That is a massive percentage of people that have an implicit bias against someone with a disability. The manifestation of these outcomes of unconscious biases manifest as barriers, and we've heard that term already today. Barriers to employment, transportation, access, relationships. So how do we check our blind spots? We've heard about that all day today. We engage. We develop common ground. We focus on the individual, not on the disability.
Biases are made. They are shaped. So I want us to think back to why you might have a bias toward LGBTQ persons in your life. So what I would encourage you to do today when it comes to what you might feel with regard to LGBTQ persons is trace back where your bias might have been shaped. Face your bias, and then reshape yourself.
Unconscious biases are innate to the human experience, but that does not mean we are powerless in the fight against them.
The things we're exposed to through social media and technology as young children really are impacting the way that we're perceiving things, whether they're true or not, oftentimes not true.
One thing that I can see for bullying is that it's persisted throughout, all middle school, high school, and college. It's a problem that exists that, is unfortunately unescapable. And a way to combat it is being a kind friend to people you don't even know. Being that one person that will smile at someone and tell them to have a great day. And it's the little things in life that can help and make a big difference.
We in the LGBTQ community are asking for one thing. We're asking for the capability to be ourselves, to be able to bring our whole selves to the party, to work, to life, to be able to be out in the world and feel safe.
So the poem that I want to share with you today is called Nobody Lesser Than or Learning How to See. Follow the path of the wise elders. My mama says, kindness don't cost you nothing. And it goes around. Remember, you are not lesser than. Remember all the wounds, but don't be charged by it. Remember every exchange and person is sacred.